Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amina Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to another episode of NextGen. On this week's theme of young people who are doing some extraordinary work, young people on the ground who are impacting our world. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. Now, the theme of this week is one that shows the goal of what NextGen is all about. NextGen hopes to amplify the voices of young people, young minorities, young Muslims, young people of color, young immigrants, young women, young people who are generally not given a platform by mainstream media. Now, what we're discussing today is an issue that is extremely personal to me. As a young activist, I get asked one question frequently, especially by the older generation. Why are my kids not getting involved? And to that, I say two things. Firstly, are you providing a lead? Are you leading by example to inspire and empower your kids so that they can follow that example? And two, as a community, right, not just at an individual level, are we providing enough resources for our kids to get involved in the community? For them to not have to struggle with their American and Muslim identity as much as many first generation immigrants, young Muslims do already. Are we as a community doing enough? And to answer this question, to explore what resources we're providing, what work needs to be done, and the importance of this work, we have with us a young youth organizer, Samaya Zama. Samaya, thank you for being with us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on our show.
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Samaya, you are the director of the Community Advocacy and Education for the Massachusetts chapter of the Council of American Islamic Relations. As the youngest board member of the Praxis Project, a support group and an organization that serves communities of color, you have dedicated not just your free time, but also your professional work to help your community, to improve the material conditions of your community. Samaya, I think that one of the things that is truly phenomenal about you is that not only do you do work, not only have you taken an initiative, you also inspire and empower other young people to do so as well. And I think that's so important, especially in today's day and age.
Absolutely. So in my role at CARE, so I work for CARE Massachusetts. CARE as an organization, as a national organization, is the largest civil rights advocacy organization for Muslims in the United States. My work within that at the Massachusetts chapter centers young people. So while my title is Director of Community Advocacy and Education, at the core and at the heart of my work is youth work and youth advocacy.
Yeah, and I know that your background is in, civil rights, community organizing, youth work, and you're still continuing to do that. But how has that background kind of inspired you to not only take an initiative yourself, but also inspire other young people to do so as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got very interested in civil rights work from, quite a young age. Growing up as a Muslim American, I think, we see the interpersonal violence, the interpersonal Islamophobia. We observe it, we take it in. We hear stories about Muslim women having their hijabs removed. We hear stories about surveillance in our masjids, very serious forms of discrimination and assaults on our civil rights. And growing up, we didn't really have the language to call it what it was, but contextualizing the condition of what it means to be a Muslim American and how we, as Muslim Americans do have rights that need to be protected was an awakening that I sort of walked into my adolescence. And CARE is sort of a door that opened up to me and was the exact platform that I needed to begin to affect that change. And as someone who was so heavily impacted by Islamophobia, I've worn hijab since I was in 7th grade. I've witnessed surveillance in my own community. I knew that these issues begin at a very young age. You begin to observe these issues at a very young age. And so I was interested in doing work with young people. And I began sort of as an inner city youth worker, not in like a predominantly Muslim context, but began as an inner city youth worker doing one-on-one youth work with young people in the greater Boston area. And so I would start to develop programming that was rooted in activism, in social movements, to inspire young people to start to learn more about themselves by observing the world around them.
You describe all of this as an awakening, right? You got involved in care, and you said in the inner city as well. And it wasn't always focused on just Muslims, it was young people at a very broad level. Now, Samaya, you also described that many of your work and inspiration comes from the scholars and Islamic texts. Tell us more about that. How have you derived, inspiration from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Islam is my first love. It is my first inspiration. It is like the gateway to my awakening in terms of moving and shifting through the world, as a Muslim and as a woman, as a brown woman. Islam has been the lens through which I understand change, and the way that I understand the necessity to begin to start to change the world. And so, the language around that now that I have to use is, Islamic liberation theology, is using Islam in our Islamic texts, hadith, the Quran, stories of the prophets that came before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and using the stories that are presented to us in the Quran to inspire Muslims towards social change. And so that has been my way of not only motivating myself, but motivating others to move towards change. For me, doing civil rights work is not merely my 9 to 5, it is my 24/7. It is, directly connected to a divine calling towards inspiring change. For me, it's not just something that, interests me and will pass. It is something that I live and I breathe, and I hope to ingrain in the very foundations of my own faith.
And I think that's beautiful, right? Because with a lot of young people, I think with the rise of, activism, sometimes even passive activism in the Muslim community, do we see a disconnect between that activism and their faith? Is that something that's prominent?
I think so. I think that a lot of activism can become really reactionary, right?
Mhm.
Like, this is what the trend is, and so this is what we'll do. And in a couple of years, you realize that that wasn't really, beneficial for your community. And I encourage people to think deeply about what their own values are, truly, as an individual, and as a Muslim, and to think truly about what it is that they want to change based off of what they have experienced themselves. And so, part of activism, I deeply believe, is being introspective. I really do believe that half of it is sitting with yourself and honestly reflecting on your own intentions. And if you are skipping that step of unpacking, uninternalizing, really, deeply sitting with who you are and where you want to go, your activism will sort of lead you in a circle. And you'll begin to make the same mistakes and not land anywhere in the end, and not build upward. You'll just build vertically rather than horizontally, and that's not what our movements need. Our movements require us to not only do that introspective work, but also do the research on the work that's being done around us currently. Who are the experts in the field? The people who came before us, our ancestors, our elders, the elders of other communities. What is the groundwork that they have laid, and are you truthfully doing the research that is required for you to do that work with authenticity?
Yeah, and I think that you're definitely right that with activists, sometimes we're just so busy in our own circle and our own work, we're afraid, sometimes to sit and reflect with ourselves and to find deeper truth and meaning to our work. But Samaya, you are the youngest board member of the Praxis project. Tell us more about the project and how being the youngest member of that board, what does that mean? You're smiling, and I just want you to know that we applaud you for the work that you're doing, and it's a big deal, right, to see a young Muslim, a visibly Muslim woman doing that work. I want to know more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Praxis Project is something I almost fell into accidentally. The Praxis Project itself is an intermediary organization that essentially provides funding to grassroots groups that are predominantly Black and Indigenous and people of color, with a heavy emphasis on Black and Indigenous grassroots movements and organizations. They provide funding from large public health funders and grant makers, and funnel that money directly to folks on the ground working on issues that we don't necessarily frame as public health issues, right? So, gun violence we see as like as a racism issue, or as a just an issue that is in its own category. But when you start to frame these issues as public health issues, there opens up a new conversation and a new sense of urgency that I think did not exist if you didn't frame it that way. And there are new pools of funding that open up as well. And so, what I'm talking about is less on the activism side and more on like the nonprofit sort of organizational side of things, which prior to the Praxis Project, I actually had never been a part of. I really am proud to be a very grassroots activist and organizer. And so this was my first invitation to the table in terms of like behind the scenes work. Like, who are the people who actually pay people to do this? Who are the people who actually run the organizations? And those are nonprofit boards, right? So you can work as an organizer for a nonprofit and your salary is set by the board, and the decisions in terms of what ends up happening are set by the board. And so typically boards, for those that are unfamiliar, they are 50 to 65 plus. They are predominantly male. They are predominantly white, even for organizations that work with Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color, like predominantly white. These people, typically board members, have decades of experience. They have PhDs, they have multiple degrees. I don't have those things, right? I have my bachelor's degree. Young woman of color, Muslim, wears hijab. Like, I am very much the opposite of what a nonprofit board member looks like. But to the credit of the Praxis Project, it is as grassroots as nonprofits get. I would say they're definitely an anomaly in the way that they function, and in the authenticity that I cited before that they sort of embody. They really embody the values of folks who work on the ground. And so part of that was, we need our board to reflect the communities we serve. And so while they were starting to sponsor more Muslims and sponsor more people of color, it really was an urgency of like diversifying the board. So that's where I walked in as the youngest board member. And when I say youngest, like, I'm the youngest by like more than
yeah.
So it's been an interesting journey, just navigating that and coming to this realization that the nonprofit space is a machine, right? It's a well-oiled machine, and it can be that can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. And for the case of Praxis, it's been a very good thing. I've seen them be able to be efficient in the way that they operate on the back end. And I've been, as a board member, have had the privilege to sort of witness that and witness like the work that goes into developing such a sort of transparent and authentic organization.
I think your journey as an activist is very interesting, that you went from doing a lot of work at bigger platforms, you're still involved in CURE, but then you also do this groundwork. And I think that it's important for activists, especially when it comes to the topic of performative activism and all of that. It's so important to stay connected. You guys are the ones that are underrated. And so huge shout out to all of those groundwork activists, to people like you, Samaya. But you also said that, you are obviously the youngest. You're a young, visibly Muslim woman. I want to know more about how those identities have shaped, how other people perceive you, some of the work that you're doing. Tell us about that.
Yeah. It's interesting. It depends on who is perceiving me, right? So, I think that truthfully, activism, organizing is, in an interesting way, it's become glamorized, and it's not glamorous work. It's really difficult work. It's really demanding work. It is work that will require you to make personal and professional sacrifices, financial sacrifices, sacrifices when it comes to your own mental health, things like that. So, I mean, there's a side to the work that I think there are folks that are aware of, and there's a side that folks are really not aware of, and while the work is always tremendously rewarding, I think that those sacrifices can't go unnoticed. You have to talk about them. And so, in the beginning, I think as a young Muslim woman, I expressed wanting to get involved in this kind of work really early on. And there was definitely a lot of fear from my own community, my own family, those closest to me, in terms of, well, where is this going to lead you? And are you aware of the immense pressures and sacrifices that you will have to make? And, at the same time, it's work that is respected in certain circles, and it is work that is not respected in others. And I think one thing that I've had to come to terms with is, the haters don't matter. And this is the work that I've chosen, and I actually don't care what people think of it. This is what I'm great at, and this is my heart literally cannot say yes to another line of work at this point in my life, maybe down the line, but at this point I'm very much, my spirit and my heart and my mind are very much at one with sort of the way that I move through my professional space. There's almost not even a separation for me. The decisions and the conversations I have in my personal life are very much in line with what I preach and what I talk about in my workspace. And so there's been, a shift in that perception, I would say, in the Muslim community, which I'm so thankful for. I definitely look at Gen Z and say, young Muslims are moving into a second sort of awakening where parents are encouraging their young Muslims to pursue these careers and to pursue change making as a serious career choice. And that, wasn't really the case for, a majority of millennials, I would say, that grew up in a, pre and post 9/11 world.
Now, Samaya, you said that you kind of have to ignore the haters. And, I think that as activists, you develop a very tough skin. And without that, we wouldn't be able to function, whether that be physically, mentally. Recently, just let me give you something personal. This week, I've just been receiving a lot of hate from, I like to call them Modi stands, right? I'm an activist against human rights violations in India. So I get a lot of hate, right, from whether that be Hindutva here in the US or, back in India. And some of my family members were around me while I was just scrolling through some of those hate. And they were like, doesn't it affect you? And I was laughing, and I was just having a very good laugh. And I think we have to find, mechanisms to convert that hate into something that either inspires us or makes us laugh, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll be discussing more about your work and the work that others are doing alongside you right after our short break. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. We'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum. Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Beaker from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with young youth organizer Samaya Zama. Now, Samaya, you have spoke about your work, right? The tremendous amount of work that you're doing with young people. But another thing that you're doing is exploring how young Muslims, especially young Muslim women, are adjusting in this so-called surveillance state, you say. Can you tell us more about what that means?
Yeah. So surveillance is definitely, I would say, through my work at CARE and even prior to that, I've shared a little bit about my experiences, my personal experiences, childhood, dealing with surveillance. Surveillance is the number one civil rights concern that faces the Muslim community and will continue to face the Muslim community. I believe that very strongly. We have seen that with the databases that have been created to hold our names. We see that with the no-fly lists. We see that in our masajid. We see that in our nonprofits. We see that whenever young Muslims begin to organize, there is a constant threat of state surveillance. There's also, CVE, Countering Violent Extremism, which is a DHS-based program that is constantly surveilling young Muslims, and sole purpose is to do that. And so, I am definitely one that doesn't shy away from naming a lot of those things and being sort of honest and transparent about some of those things. And I know these are, tremendously difficult conversations for our communities to have. It's a lot easier to talk about, walking down the street and someone is saying something Islamophobic to you. It's a lot easier to talk about those stories. Those stories are almost, it's sad, but they're almost more digestible than talking about, the FBI agent that spent 6 months pretending to be Muslim in our masjid. So, and both of those things are very serious things that happen. And so we need to be able to, share those stories and connect and unpack a lot of those things. And then, moving forward to this sort of new COVID-19 reality where we are using our virtual spaces more than ever. Young Muslims, are also surveilled online. There's a lot of evidence to support that as well. So, as activists, as organizers, I think when we are leading young Muslims into this space of change making and wanting to organize digitally or virtually with other people, it is, we should be more responsible about how we lead young Muslims into that space. And we talk about digital safety, we talk about virtual safety, we talk about doxing. Just a couple years ago, I had an intern who was doxed. Her Twitter was doxed, young Muslim woman who was just interning for me and did not come into the office the next day because she was afraid of doing so. And so I take these things quite seriously. I really do talk about these things because, on the one hand, the side of activism that might seem attractive and flowery, because, we do have Ilhan Omar now. We have our hijab wearing activists, or we have our Muslim activists who have a lot of clout and have an aesthetic and have an appeal that is so attractive to many, there are things that they deal with that they don't talk about, right? And that is even more serious for those on the grassroots level that don't have the media attention to protect them, that don't have people paying attention to their safety, right? And so I think if we want to be the mentors that we wish we had, I think we have to be authentic about what the dangers are, and how to really keep ourselves and our communities safe.
And you do a lot of work with young Muslim, and just in the summer you're doing a young Muslim leadership initiative. But before we get into what that initiative is, do you educate those young people about the things that you're speaking to us about? Is this a conversation that you have to have? It's a difficult conversation, I'm sure, but is this a conversation that you have with those young leaders?
That's a really great question. So I think it depends on how those conversations are had. Talking directly about surveillance is, it's not something that young people are unaware of. A lot of young Muslims don't keep their first and last names on their Instagram accounts. They don't. That's common practice for a lot of young people engaging with virtual spaces already. And so our conversations really talk about the differences between systemic and structural Islamophobia, and then interpersonal and internalized Islamophobia, right? So systemic and structural Islamophobia really looks like, the systems and structures that are perpetuating laws and policies and programs and practices that work to surveil and police Muslims. So that includes the Muslim ban. That is a literal law that is part of a broader system and structure that is working on Islamophobic policies and practices. That looks very different from, calling me a towel head, right? Walking down the street, someone so there's a difference between the interpersonal and this systemic structure that then breeds the interpersonal. And so we talk about that. We talk about the broader sort of Islamophobia tree, where the roots of the tree are this system and the structure, and the leaves that grow out of it are, our feelings that get hurt, us being physically assaulted, us experiencing tremendous amount of violence in our personal lives because we are Muslim. And so, I think these conversations need to be navigated with a lot of tact, with a lot of mindfulness. And luckily, I think my background in youth work provides a really great avenue for me to explain a lot of issues that face the Muslim community without, weaponizing those issues to discourage young Muslims to get involved.
Yeah, because it is scary, right? If you just straight up tell these young Muslims who are passionate about getting involved some of these things, it definitely may discourage them. But you are not doing that. You're encouraging young people, young Muslims. Tell me about your Young Muslim Leadership Program. What do you guys intend to do? What is the goal of this program?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love talking about this. Yeah. So I've done this for 3 years now. I've been with CARE Massachusetts for 3 years now, and this is my third iteration of the Muslim Youth Leadership Program. So prior to me joining CARE, this position did not exist. So I had no blueprint to work off of. And so I've sort of developed this department from the ground up, and have really worked hard to create a lot of the programming that exists within my department. And the Muslim Youth Leadership Program, I would say, is the central program that we do once a year. It happens in the summer. It's 4 days and 3 nights of packed programming with 4 key skill sets that we focus on. The first one is grassroots community organizing, civic engagement, media literacy, and coalition building. So through, a ton of research and talking to young Muslims and my own, life experience as an activist, I really identified these 4 key skill set groups and knew that, these are the 4 skill sets that every activist needs to sort of have a ton of experience in, right? And so we dedicate the 4 days and 3 nights to just, those 4 key skill sets. They stay with us overnight. We book dorms, and the young Muslims get to know one another. They get to know the staff, and it's a really, really amazing and rewarding experience. We have anywhere from 30 to 40 kids with us every summer, all high school age, Muslim identifying. And I always like to say that, MYLP is a leadership machine. The young people that come out of MYLP, they go on to do amazing things. They get involved in their town. They get involved in their masjids. They get involved in different social movements. Many of my young people who began 3 years ago, I saw them protesting for BLM this summer. And so it was like the proudest moment for me. And it's not to the credit of the program, but to the credit of the young people who make a decision to apply and decide that this is really, what they want to do. And this summer, because of, COVID-19 and being in quarantine, we don't have an in-person program. So we've taken MYLP to a virtual facilitation model. And so that's also been, tremendously rewarding.
Samaya, I think I might have to join. I'm in high school, so that would be absolutely phenomenal. You're just so passionate about what you do. And I think that, just seeing those same kids 3 years later get involved, do some actual work must have been as rewarding as you said it was. I also want to know the response from, the other youth. Did all of them go on to, get involved in their community? Was it more positive? Did you have constructive, remarks from that work that you've been doing for 3 years? How was it like?
Yeah. So I think activist work can manifest in many different ways, which is why, I think an activist is very different than an organizer. Activism is talking about the change you want to make. Organizing is putting the actions behind the words. So you can be, an activist and just be talking to your families, talking on Twitter. You can be, just tweeting into the void. You can be sharing Facebook articles and call yourself an activist. And you're right, you are an activist. Organizing takes work to back the words that you are claiming that you care about. And so that means actually showing up to campaigns and actions, following through with the sort of commitments that you are making, and working together as an individual, working with other individuals to band together to organize on a specific issue. And so what I've seen with my young people is they will fall into either category, and I am perfectly okay with that. I don't think everyone is an organizer, and I don't think everyone should be an organizer. While it's a very incredible thing to dedicate your personal time or your professional time to organizing, I think it is a very specific skill set that is really demanding. And while some of my young people have gone on to become organizers, many of them I would say are just activists. They are having important conversations at home about anti-Blackness, about internalized Islamophobia, about gender-based violence, about environmental justice, and how that is directly linked to our prophetic and Islamic traditions. And so as long as they're even having those conversations, I consider my job to have been largely successful. So
yeah, and Samaya will be speaking more on how young people who are watching us can get involved right after our short break. Samaya Zama is with us, and we'll be right back.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World's Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilized thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to over $600 million. 2 of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, A Slow-Burning Genocide, on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tel Aviv Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand With Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast from China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with organizer and activist Samaya Zama. Now, Samaya, is the young, are there enough platforms and resources being provided for young Muslims who want to get involved by the Muslim community? Samaya, you're muted. Yeah.
My apologies. I would say no. There really aren't enough spaces. I think, many existing organizing spaces that are not, Muslim organized are not always Muslim friendly. And so that's something to keep in mind. If young people are wanting to get involved and, there's just not an Islamic ethos or an Islamic sort of space for them to be authentic with who they are and what they believe in, or how they would like to present themselves. I think that is largely missing from the broader organizational structures that exist. And then within the Muslim community, there needs to be more organizing spaces that are specifically carved out for young people who want to make a difference. I really do think that part of that is not having people who are paid full time to do this. I feel very fortunate that I have a salary that I can utilize towards sustaining my work, because otherwise I don't think that I can mentor 30 kids in a summer on my free time. That's not going to happen, and the quality of the programming is not going to be what it is. I dedicate my entire work week to developing a groundbreaking sort of program that ties in, Islamic theology and also ties in contextualizing where we live and what the issues are, and have the youth work experience and show up in that way. And that is only possible through supporting organizations like CARE, supporting organizations that are dedicating their time and their resources towards young people. And so I think as a community, we really do need to have a conversation about reprioritizing, a lot of where our funds go. We do support, building new masjids, and that should continue to happen. But what will happen if those masjids are empty in the future, right? And I think it's an unfortunate reality that, a lot of young Muslims are increasingly feeling disconnected from the faith. And for me, what has tied me so deeply to the faith is my work towards the Muslim Ummah, my activism work. That is the backbone of my faith, because I do believe it is a divine calling that Allah has commanded us to leave this world better than how we found it, right? And I think we really do need to recontextualize how we're thinking about and talking about these things.
Yeah, and Samaya, you're saying that obviously the community is not providing enough resources to young people. So then what is your advice to young people who do want to get involved, who want to make an impact, and like you said, leave the world better than what they found it?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say reach out to folks in your community that have been doing this work for a couple of years now. Folks who are maybe in their 20s or 30s and are really settled into this career path. Look at their trajectory, look at, what they got involved in and how they got involved in a lot of those things. You'll find that, the opportunities are there. They might not be well advertised, or you might not have heard about it, but really start to plug yourself into those networks, because those are the networks that will become, more valuable than gold. Like, there's nothing more valuable than having, a mentor and someone who is also Muslim identifying and looks like you and speaks like you and believes the things that you believe in. That person can guide you more than anyone when it comes to a lot of these issues, and really start to make asks of your elders, make asks of your masajids, of your local organizations. If you have a CARE chapter in your state, if you have other chapters of other Muslim organizations in your state that of taking on issues that you care about, reach out to them directly, express your interest, let them know, like, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, I need an internship, or I need, what type of programming are you providing for someone like me? And, I'm sure that the more that you begin to do that and your friends begin to do that, people start to pay attention and they start to develop an interest in what you care about.
Yeah. And you spoke about, providing ask to the elder generation. What is the role of our elders, our respected elders who may be watching today? What is their role in encouraging the youth?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, our elders have laid the foundation for us to be able to do this work, right? Like for some of us who are not Indigenous Muslim, are not Black Muslim, and we're not here for generations, for those of us who come from immigrant backgrounds, our parents made the decision to come here and really laid the foundation for our futures. And I never like to downplay that, because what they did in its own sense is a type of activism and is, braver than anything that we can do in our lifetimes, right? Like, it is definitely something that we can never repay. And so part of what I think that needs to happen is, that realization within young Muslims of, we have a very unique opportunity to be to bring our ummah forward, and to bring Muslim Americans forward specifically in the country. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but also for our elders to understand that our young Muslim Americans need their guidance and need their mentorship. It's really important to not get lost in the sauce, as they say, and just kind of like really have a handle on our background, our the things that we believe in, and that's not really possible without our elders. The other thing that I will say that I think is largely missing is in understanding of the history of Muslims in America. A lot of young Muslims come upon that history accidentally, and much of that is because our elders that immigrated here may not have had that understanding or that context, or were not provided that context of Muslims have existed here for so long before we came here, and so we really do need to, as a community, both elders and young people, honor the sacrifices and the legacy of Black Muslims. And I don't want to part without saying that, because we can sit here and have a conversation about activism and organizing, but the truth of the matter is that the very first activists, the very first organizers, the very first people who even modeled for me and for you and for many other Muslim Americans what that even means, what that even looks like, were Black Muslims. And we are merely, imitating, and we are merely, we're merely just mirroring the tremendous work that has been done before us. So.
You speak about how, these Black Muslim activists are essential to the history of this country, right? Far before our parents or our grandparents may have immigrated here. So before we, end today, I want to ask you, right, what is your advice to young Muslims who feel that their Muslim identity and their American identity is separate, right? They struggle between both of those identities. What is your advice to them?
I would say that struggle is valid. First, I just want to say, I think we dismiss it as, it's cut and dry, and it's fine that you just ignore those feelings. They're not real. They're real feelings. And there's definitely, I encourage young Muslims to investigate that. I really do believe in diving deep into the issue and really sitting with yourself and thinking about what it is about either one of those identities that is making you feel a discomfort. And to really think about that, and to also, understand that, that is not a unique dilemma. I think the first people to really talk about this were Black Muslims, or, Black Americans, actually, to talk about the double consciousness, the sense of I am both Black and American, and my American identity has largely been not inclusive of my Black identity, right? And that is real. And Muslim Americans who are feeling that is real. There is a large part of our American identity that has caused harm to our Muslim identity, and we want to sit with those feelings and really investigate those feelings, but in the end come to a place where, we say to ourselves that no one can tell us who we are besides ourselves, right? We have the power and the agency to really call ourselves what it is we want to call ourselves. And in the end, like, the power that you think another person has over you is really just dictated by how much you allow that person to have power over you, right? And find pride in the things that you find pride in, and really sit with that.
Yeah, Samaya, definitely, indeed, no one can tell us who we are except ourselves. And I think that's a beautiful statement, and we'll end with that. Today we had an enlightening discussion, just sitting with you here. I already feel enlightened, and maybe after this discussion, I might sit with myself and do exactly what you said to do, that something that a lot of young people, young organizers, young activists shy away from doing, from self-reflecting. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for our viewers for tuning in, and we'll be back tomorrow with a new episode. Tomorrow we'll be speaking on gun violence, and until next time, assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all.